Alright, to start off this quick run-through we're going to do through November of a bunch of stuff that we've missed throughout the year, I think I want to start with the New Mutants, since we kind of thought it was pretty much never going to be seen. It was one of those movies that was so delayed that I feel like some people still wondered if it even existed, and any of the advertisements that were put out were just a distraction to keep people from realizing that no, this movie will never exist and will never come out. But no, it actually does exist, and it actually did come out finally, I think in, like, at the end of August or something. And this is a portion of, like, the X-Men area that I'm really not familiar with at all. So the only thing I really knew going into this, as far as the characters and who they were, was, like, some quick Wikipedia scans. So I'm just bringing that up now to show that, I don't want to pretend that I know more than I do, so that's what I knew about these characters going in, which is pretty much nothing. And as far as going into it, seeing it as this thing that was constantly delayed and was like kept getting reshot and re-edited, and they weren't sure what genre they wanted to do, if they were going to do the horror thing or whatever, or if the studio was going to back out of it out of fear or something. The thing that kind of concerned me was not only did it seem like a movie that was going to be pushed forever, but the fact that and the fact that this is also a series that's kind of been getting kind of progressively worse when you look at, like, taking, like, Logan out of the equation, obviously, but, like, that area of Apocalypse followed by Dark Phoenix was kind of... I mean, I didn't hate Dark Phoenix as much as a lot of other people did, but I really didn't care for Apocalypse, and it really didn't feel like we were heading in a very good direction. And then to see this one getting reshot and re-edited so much, and delayed so much, over and over again for like 3 years, and on top of that, learning that it was from the director of The Fault in Our Stars. Like, none of this seemed like it was matching up, or lining up to be something that was going to end up being worthwhile. I mean, unless you look at it in the way of, like, it's... like, if you want to compare it to The Fault in Our Stars as far as, like, character work goes, because that seems to be a lot of what he was trying to focus on here. Where it's like, you have, like, he's focusing on the youth, and they're in, like, life-changing or particularly life-threatening things are happening to them that they're just discovering. Maybe there's something there that he was kind of hoping he could carry over, or the studio, by hiring him, was hoping would carry over. And you can see this. A lot of this movie is being able to see what they were going for, and just kind of not quite getting there. Because it also, if I remember correctly, came out to not exactly scathing reviews, but basically everybody was saying it's not the level of shit you think it is, but it's still kind of somewhat shit. So the bar was already kind of being lowered as we were going, because the bar can't really be any lower going in when you have all this stuff going into it that's giving you doubt that this would be anything worth the time. But it does have an intriguing opening scene where we have our sort of protagonist, Danny, waking up, and it seems like there's some sort of fire outside, something really disastrous, and she's being dragged out of bed by her dad. And now that we've adjusted to the idea of something's on fire and it's really bad, it's out of control, and they have to get away from it, it's jarring in this really interesting way when they open the door and they're blasted by snow, and there's snow everywhere while all this is also going on. And it feels like practically apocalyptic as they're trying to get away from it. And her dad, of course, is Adam Beach, who who was Slipknot in Suicide Squad. So I think you know what's going to happen to him in this opening scene, because comic book movies do not want to hang on to Adam Beach for more than a scene or two, apparently. So, and then of course this is going to get her into this hospital that's mysteriously run by Alice Braga and seemingly nobody else. What's interesting about this movie is how we've gotten so used to comic book movies, especially Marvel movies, being really, really big. So the fact that most of this is set in, like, just this one location with very few people is interesting, and kind of an interesting way to turn what we expect on its head a little bit, but it's, now that that's been established, the character work has to be really, really strong, and the ideas and where they take these different characters and what the different characters can do has to be interesting, and maybe that's, I mean, surely that's the case in the source material, but I don't know that the movie completely gets us there. But before we get into the characters, another thing we should talk about is the tone. Since we were talking about all this stuff, and I kept wondering what everybody meant, because I kept hearing about the whole horror thing. So, as I was watching it, it was like I don't really get much of that vibe at all, except for the fact that apparently, I had to look this up because I could have sworn, apparently the place, where the hospital where they shot it, is also the hospital in Shutter Island. So immediately it is going to feel kind of like a bit eerie and isolated in that regard. And it also kind of feels like Anya Taylor-Joy is kind of on the other side of where she was in Glass. But apart from that, it takes a little while where we kind of get introduced to the characters first, and then it almost kind of felt suddenly like it had horror vibes in it. And classic horror vibes, and not just some of the stuff like Anya Taylor-Joy's whole thing where she keeps having these visions from her past, where she's confronted by what she calls like the Smiley Men or something like that, which is kind of a terrifying idea because at first we don't see him at first. She just says that, and we can get our own image in our head. And then it's a bit of a letdown in the creep factor when we see it's just like a mask. But then it's even more of a letdown when he actually takes the mask off, and they're just like your ordinary average CGI monsters that we've been seeing for the past decade or so. But there's also stuff like there's a supernatural moment in a pool, or there's a scene where Maisie Williams is potentially in danger in the shower. That feel kind of sort of like classic 80s horror vibes in a way. But it doesn't really last, and it is one of those cases where you can almost feel like the studio was changing the amount of horror they wanted to put into it, and all these reshoots and recuts and all that stuff. And you could almost feel them kind of backing down from that, and it's like they could have taken that further, but I mean, they still, whenever the monsters or whatever they are there, I mean, some of those elements are still here, but it doesn't really feel like a horror thing anymore. It just feels like we're getting back into the average action territory that we'd expect, which is unfortunate. So when that's not going on, we are getting to know the characters, which are basically, a lot of them start off sort of antagonistic towards each other, of course, so that they can eventually bond in John Hughes-like ways, up to and including, the whole scene in the Breakfast Club when they, break out of the room and they run around and dance and shit. It's basically completely recreated here. And I can maybe see this working, but it already feels pretty played out, especially since we just had the first It movie so recently, which kind of really did an incredible job doing the balance of the kids being kids and then the horror element. And so it just feels like a retread of that kind of territory, and all of it feels like it already feels familiar going into it. So this really didn't do anything to break away from it, because all it really seems focused on doing is homage, without kind of doing its own thing, which means you can acknowledge something as an homage, but then it just kind of quickly de-evolves into just being a cliche. And there's no real magic behind it at all. And it pretty much makes it feel lifeless, despite the fact that we know what we're supposed to be feeling about it. And there's one thing that I had a problem with that is unfortunate, because apparently it seems to be the most praised thing about the movie, and I'm having deja vu, because, going back to the Adam Beach thing, because the most praised aspect of this movie seems to be Anya Taylor-Joy and her performance and how she handles her character. And and people are really liking her, and I really like her as an actress. But I was having flashbacks of when Margot Robbie was getting a lot of praise for when she played Harley Quinn that first time in Suicide Squad. And and as much as I love Margot Robbie also, I just wasn't getting it. All I saw was there was a really high cringe factor to it, whether it be her one-liners or the whole thing. Because at first it feels like she's straight up doing Angelina Jolie in Girl Interrupted. She's got the similar hair. She's got the similar fuck you everybody attitude. She's in the same setting. She's even got a puppet that she uses. Which is like, there's that one scene of Girl Interrupted where Jolie's doing that, and it's like, I feel like there's no way at the end of the day that that's a coincidence. Sure, like, they're homaging everything else, why not? Throw in a little Girl Interrupted while you're at it. And while the puppet does end up being, like, a reference to another character, I just really wasn't into this character. It's one of those characters that's rebellious just for the sake of it. Like, there's the moment when Danny's trying to talk to her, and they've just met, and she talks to the puppet, and she says, like, yeah, I hate her too. And it's like, well, based on what? For just existing? And that's one of those things where, obviously, that's the character, and not necessarily just a shittily written character, it's just the character. Like, any fault that I have in regards to watching her is, that's the point, that's a flaw in that character. But and the same thing for the character, like, seemingly constantly contradicting herself, gets really annoying. But at the same time, though, is even if those are just character flaws and not necessarily writing flaws, it carried over when it gets to the point to where you can tell we're supposed to be warming up to her. And I still just really wasn't there at all with this character. And it only got worse and more cringy as it went, as she got more and more like the other, not like Margot Robbie's performance, but I felt very similar to the way I felt about that performance when it gets towards the end, and there's a big CGI fight, of course, and so she gets these little one-liners in there that just honestly shouldn't even be there, but whatever. So, and as I'm talking about more cliches that it goes into, there's also a lot of time devoted to the fact that we don't know what Danny's power is, but just as sure as we know that a big CGI fight of some kind is coming towards the end, we also know that she will figure out what her power is just in time when she needs it most and when the group needs it most. So, you can see all of that stuff coming from a mile away. Pretty much, that's basically what the whole movie is seeing everything coming from a mile away. And by the end, it just kind of gets laughable. But everybody else has been saying it because it's kind of true. It's probably not as bad as that sounds. But like it wasn't an excruciating experience or anything, despite all the problems that are obviously there. Um, and the lead actress is appealing enough, and Maisie Williams plays like a really sympathetic character throughout it. But it's really just here. It's not going to be very memorable. Obviously, they leave it open for something that's not going to happen after it. It feels less like a franchise starter and more like the first episode of a CW series that'll go nowhere. Is kind of what it feels. It's actually really what it feels like. So, yeah, but if there's one thing I can give it credit for, it is mercifully short. Like, I kind of can't believe how short it is, especially for being, like, a comic book movie nowadays. And especially when you look at stuff like Apocalypse that felt like it was 1 billion years long. And I remember, like, praising Dark Phoenix for being under 2 hours, because it was a relief. And this is, like, barely an hour. Actually, take end credits out of the equation, this is definitely less than an hour and a half. So, I mean, it knows when to quit, I suppose. So there is that. I mean, if that's a compliment you can give a movie, I don't know what that says about the overall quality, but I think that's pretty much where I land on this. So I'm pretty much in that same area of it could have been a lot worse, but there's really nothing of note here whatsoever. So, yeah, if I didn't have to do, like, a video like this, or if I wasn't doing a video like this, this would already be out of my mind, but I knew that I would have to remember it to talk about it, so now that this is out of the way, it's probably gonna be gone. So, that's pretty much, it for that, I think. So, we're just gonna keep doing this. We're gonna go through a bunch of new movies, and the 4th season of Fargo, and that'll be what this long line of videos that are all coming out pretty much at once are going to be. So until the next one, that's it for this.